Canada, 1914. A ship carrying 376 human beings was refused permission to dock, not because they were criminals. Not because they were sick. Not because they were dangerous, simply because of the color of their skin. The Kamagata Maru was a Japanese steamship, chartered by Gurdat Singh, a wealthy Sikh businessman from Singapore who believed in one simple idea: that British subjects had the right to move freely within the British Empire. Indians were British subjects. Canada was British territory. The logic was perfect, but logic meant nothing when race was involved. These 376 passengers, mostly Sikh men from Punjab, along with some Hindus and Muslims, had sold everything they owned. Their land, their animals, their savings, everything, for a chance at a better life in Canada. They had heard the stories. Canada was rich. Canada had land. Canada had opportunity. Canada was part of the same empire they had served, fought for, and bled for. They boarded that ship full of hope. They had absolutely no idea what was waiting for them on the other side of the ocean, because Canada had a secret policy. An ugly, shameful, deliberately hidden policy designed with one single purpose: to keep non-white people out. Forever. And these 376 people were about to crash directly into that wall. This is their story. And it is one of the most painful, most important, and most forgotten chapters in the history of the British Empire. To understand what happened to the Kamagata Maru, you need to understand what Canada was doing behind closed doors. Canada in the early 1900s had a dream. Not a dream of freedom or equality, but a dream of a white nation. A country that would remain racially pure, dominated by European settlers forever, and they were willing to do anything to protect that dream. The problem was, they were part of the British Empire. And the British Empire officially treated all its subjects equally, regardless of race. At least on paper, so Canada couldn't simply say, "No Indians allowed." That would embarrass the empire. That would cause outrage. That would expose the racism for exactly what it was. So instead, they got clever. Disgustingly clever. They created the Continuous Journey Regulation of 1908. A law that sounded completely neutral on the surface. It simply stated that immigrants must arrive in Canada via a continuous journey from their country of origin. But here was the trap. There was no direct ship service between India and Canada. None. Not a single route. Deliberately, shipping companies were quietly pressured not to offer direct routes from India, so Indians couldn't come continuously. Because there was no continuous route. Because Canada made sure there wasn't one. It was racism wrapped in bureaucracy. Discrimination disguised as paperwork. Gurdat Singh saw through it immediately. And he decided to call their bluff. He chartered the Kamagata Maru himself. A direct journey from India to Canada. Continuous. Legal. Perfectly within the rules they had written. He thought he had beaten their system. He hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. May 23, 1914. The Kamagata Maru arrived in Burrard Inlet, Vancouver Harbor. 376 people crowded the deck, exhausted, after weeks at sea, straining to see the Canadian shore through the morning mist. Children pointed. Men whispered prayers. Women held their belongings tightly. This was it. The new world. The new life. Canadian immigration officials boarded the ship immediately, and then, nothing happened. The passengers were not allowed to disembark. Not one single person was permitted to set foot on Canadian soil. The ship was ordered to anchor in the harbor and wait. Days passed. Then weeks. The Canadian government scrambled behind the scenes. They knew Gurdat Singh had technically followed the Continuous Journey Regulation. They needed another way to stop them. Immigration inspectors boarded repeatedly, interviewing passengers for hours, looking for any technical violation they could use. They found tiny paperwork issues with some passengers and used them to reject the entire group. Meanwhile, on the ship, conditions were becoming desperate. Food supplies were running dangerously low. Fresh water was rationed. The summer heat was brutal. Men who had sold everything to be here were sitting on a ship going nowhere, watching a country that didn't want them, through a window they were never allowed to open. The local Sikh community in Vancouver tried desperately to help, sending food, boats, raising money, hiring lawyers, filing legal challenges, but Canada had made up its mind, these people would never set foot on Canadian soil. The only question now was, how far would Canada go to make that happen? 2 months. The Komagata Maru sat in Vancouver Harbour for 2 entire months. The legal battles failed. Every court challenge was dismissed. Every appeal rejected. The Canadian government had made its position completely clear. On July 23, 1914, the Canadian government sent a warship. HMCS Rainbow, a full naval cruiser, was dispatched to escort the Komagata Maru out of Canadian waters. Think about that for a moment, a warship sent against 376 civilians. Hungry, exhausted, desperate human beings, who had committed no crime whatsoever, except wanting a better life, the passengers refused to leave peacefully. There were tense standoffs on the deck. Angry confrontations. Men who had given up everything refused to simply sail away, in silence, but they had no choice. The Komagata Maru turned around and began the long journey back to India. Back to the lives they had sold. Back to a future they thought they had escaped. Weeks later the ship arrived back in Calcutta, now Kolkata, on September 29, 1914. British colonial authorities were waiting. Suspicious of the returning passengers, viewing them as potential troublemakers and revolutionaries, British police attempted to forcibly detain them. What followed was a violent confrontation at Budge Budge. British police opened fire on the returning passengers. 19 people were killed. Many more were wounded. Gurdat Singh escaped but spent years as a fugitive. These people had survived 2 months of humiliation in Canada, only to be shot at in their own homeland. The world barely noticed. For decades the Komagata Maru incident was buried. Hidden. Quietly forgotten by the people who should have remembered it most. Canada moved on. Built its identity. Told its story of freedom and opportunity, and welcome. And conveniently left out the chapter about the ship they turned away with a warship, but the families of those 376 passengers never forgot. The Sikh community never forgot. The wound stayed open for over a century. In 2008, 94 years later, the government of British Columbia formally apologized. It was a start. But not enough. In 2016, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stood in Parliament and delivered a full formal apology on behalf of the Government of Canada. He called it exactly what it was, a product of deliberate racial discrimination. A shameful chapter. An injustice that demanded acknowledgement. It had taken 102 years for Canada to say the words, "We were wrong," but here is what makes the Komagata Maru story bigger than just one ship and one harbor and one summer of injustice. These 376 people represent every human being who was ever turned away, not because of what they had done, but because of what they looked like. Every person who was told the door of opportunity was open for everyone, and then watched it slam shut in their face. Gurdat Singh spent his life fighting for justice. He died in 1954, still waiting for an apology that never came in his lifetime. The Komagata Maru sits at the bottom of history. But its story refuses to sink, because some injustices are too important to forget, and too powerful to stay silent about.